So you can be seated. Again, thanks for coming today. It's really great to see all of you and all of you that are tuning in on my live stream. And I'm just going to share a little bit about my husband and I and this church launch that you're looking at right now. My husband Josh and I are from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We've been a part of City Reach Network I've been a part of it for about 6 years. And Josh and I will be married about 3 years. We'll be married 3 years in January. So he's been a part of City Reach with me since we've been married. And City Reach was very important to me in my development as a Christian, so I really believe in this ministry, and I believe in their calling to reach out to people, to break them out of drug addiction and out of any other kind of addictions. And they actually have a great program for HELLP homes, so if you were near an area with a City Reach, they actually have HELLP homes if you need a safe place, if you need to get delivered from drugs, if you're homeless, if you're in an abusive relationship. They provide HELLP homes for you to go into to go through a 9-month rehabilitation program. So that's one of the great things that we love about City Reach, and now we're launching here in Port St. Lucie, which is where you're watching me from. So today I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my husband and myself, because we have a great testimony with our son. So even if you don't have children, or you don't have any health problems, I think that there's going to be something for you to take away from this message. And from our testimony, I hope it really inspires you and fills you up. So back in 2015, I learned that I was pregnant with my son, and it was right before we were about to move to Florida for the first time. So we had just committed to moving to Florida. We had just that week, I had quit my job. I had, gotten rid of my apartment lease, and all of a sudden I found out I was pregnant, and that was it was a real turning point, because, should you leave your family, should you leave everything, your support system, and go to where I know we were called to. And so that's what we did. We left Pittsburgh, we came down here to Florida, and then on my 20-week anatomy exam, you go in and you learn if you're having a boy or a girl. I didn't really know what else you learned at a 20-week anatomy exam, but apparently that's when they tell you if they see problems, if they see anything on the ultrasound that's unusual. And so I was in there a very long time, and they kept taking pictures. And all of a sudden, about a couple hours later, I had waited. And I'm thinking, is there something, that they're just going to tell me if I'm having a boy or a girl? Like, is it really that complicated? And all of a sudden they come back and they tell me, you need to come in, sit down. We're having a little conference call with some other specialists around the world discussing what we're seeing. And what they were looking at was a very small baby. He fell in the 1 percentile for expected length and weight. So when you do an ultrasound, they measure the baby, they measure the spine, and it's supposed to be so long. Then they do an estimated weight from that. So they told me that at 20 weeks, he fell in the 1 percentile. He was extremely small, and they felt that he had a very large head for his body. So they weren't quite sure why I had such a small baby, and told me that even though I had taken a Down syndrome blood test, that I should have amniotic fluid testing, which can cause spontaneous abortions. And I didn't want to do it. I said that I was negative for the Down syndrome test, and I didn't believe that there was a genetic problem, so I didn't want them to go through with it. So they told me that that was very unwise on my part, because whatever was wrong was definitely a genetic issue, and that I should abort my baby, that I didn't understand what having a baby with special needs would be like, and that I was being an irresponsible parent. So this continued for the next 8 weeks. For the next 8 weeks, I went through 3 or so ultrasounds a week to measure the weight and the progression of his development. And every time I went in, I went to 3 or 4 different specialists. I actually went to 3 different obstetricians. They all told me the same thing. They all told me that my child was definitely a genetic issue and that I should have an abortion. So imagine for 8 weeks being told the same thing from the medical community. You don't understand what's happening. You really don't get it. And I just said, I don't think it's a genetic problem. I just don't believe that it's a genetic problem. And they said, well, you're not going to know unless you do the amniotic fluid testing. And the more you get developed with a baby, the worse it is for you to get a test like that, because there's always more danger to the baby. So I told them I didn't want it. And it didn't matter if he did, because I believe that there was point in every life that comes into the world, that every life has a destiny, and every life has, it's special and it should be cherished. And even if there was special needs, that doesn't mean that he was going to be any less of a little boy to me. So all of a sudden, on March 24th, I was not feeling very good. It was 8 weeks later after I had been told that they suspected issues. And I went in because I wasn't feeling well, I couldn't eat. I felt just like really down. And they told me that, it was probably fine. That's just like how being pregnant is. And I told them, this is how pregnant is. It's just not going to last. Like, this is like really, really terrible. And I mean, at 28 weeks, you're like just 6 months pregnant. Now, you're supposed to hold for 3 more months until like 9 months. So like no one even knew I was really pregnant yet, because I didn't even look like I was pregnant. Like, this was my first child. I was actually fit. No one could really tell. And so, I go into the hospital and they're like, what's going on with you? And I told them I just didn't feel well, and they checked up on the baby and saw that he was really suffering. That the blood flow to the baby was actually not flowing. It was getting to a point where it had almost stopped. And so when a baby's developing, you have this blood flow from the mom to the baby. And if it's not consistent, if it starts to slow down, it can stop and even reverse. Even the blood flow can go from the baby to the mom, and the baby ends up dying. So I didn't know what was going on with me, and while I was there in the hospital, they told me that I actually suffered from a rare pregnancy disorder called HELLP syndrome. So HELLP syndrome is where your body ends up rejecting the baby, your organs start shutting down, which is why I didn't feel good. So my liver started shutting down, my kidneys started shutting down, but even more strangely, my platelet cells, which are really important in clotting, they prevent you from bleeding out in your brain on a daily basis. They, save you when you deliver your child. They had been dying off and not replenishing. So I had like no platelet cells, and they didn't even know how I had not started spontaneously bleeding in my body. So I get to the hospital and they tell me that they can see this because of my blood counts on my blood work. They redid the blood work like 4 times because they actually didn't think it was possible. So once they determined that that was my problem, the only way to resolve it is for me to deliver my baby. So this disorder, once you deliver your child in most women, is totally reversed. Your body goes back to normal. So, I mean, at this point in my life, I'm not expecting this. I'm 28 weeks pregnant. I'm told all these negative things about Joshua, and here I am suddenly going to have a premature baby. So they fill me up with these platelet cells. It takes them about 4 hours from the time I was admitted to the time that they delivered me. It was really quick. And at that point, like the 4-hour mark, they had given me the last bag of platelet cells and sort of just took a chance on me that I would even make it. So they delivered Joshua, and he was actually stillborn. He already died. So they had been watching him on the monitor, saw that he was in distress, but somehow between the time that I was like up in the hospital room, from them disconnecting me and taking me down to surgery, preparing me for surgery, he had actually passed away. So when they delivered him, he was stillborn. And he's small, he's stillborn, he's premature, and they tried to revive him for about 10 minutes, and they actually stopped. They tried to really revive him because they knew that I had held on this long, like I wanted this child. So they really went the extra mile because I went in there with a live baby. And so after 10 minutes, they stopped, and once they stopped, he actually came back to life. So this is a true story of God really reviving people from the dead, because he had been suffering from oxygen deprivation actually my whole pregnancy. That's part of the syndrome, is that it affects the blood flow. So the blood flow to him wasn't as it should be all the time, and he was being suffocated during his development. So he came back to life, and he was 1 pound, 11 ounces. He was the size of like a good sweet potato or zucchini. And they took him immediately to the neonatal intensive care unit, which is called the NICU. That's where little premature babies go. And they kept him in a little plastic incubator for nearly the whole 6 months he was there. So when you have a premature baby, you can't really touch them, you can't really interact with them. I actually couldn't even hold him until he was about 2 months old. He can't breastfeed. He can't do a lot of things that normal full-term babies would experience. And when he was delivered, he suffered a grade 3 brain bleed in the ventricles of the brain. And the ventricles are these special little balloons in your head that regulate your spinal fluid. So it's actually secreted up here in your brain, and then it travels down your spinal cord. So the reason that they thought he had an enlarged head was because he was going through this brain bleed in his head, causing these ventricles to swell. And that was very concerning for the doctors, because when your brain swells from this extra pressure in these little balloons, it can affect your brain tissue, and they would have to relieve it. They would have to do neurosurgery on a baby that's, not even a full-term child. So they had him in the NICU for 7 days over here at St. Mary's Hospital in West Palm Beach, and their team was not sufficient to take care of him because he was such a critical case. So they had him transferred to Nicholas Children's Hospital in Miami. So he was actually 3 hours away from us, and he was there for another 140 days, a total of 147 days in the hospital. Once they transferred him to Miami, they determined that that was best for him because he might need the intervention from the neonatal neurosurgeon. And every day he was there, he just overcame all the odds. He didn't have any negative impact on his brain tissue. The little blood clot that was caused by this intraventricular brain bleed miraculously disappeared or dislodged itself so that the spinal fluid could get where it needed to go. He was one of the only babies with this problem that didn't need what's called a shunt to relieve the pressure. And to this day, still does not have any concerns or issues, no genetic abnormalities. We did a full genetic panel on him. He does not have Down syndrome. And even if he did, he would still be my child. Amen. So my point from my testimony is that there's a lot of things that the medical field can tell you that they think that they can see, but God makes a way. God made a way where there seemed to be no way, and healed everything that could have even been wrong. Because at the end of the day, he's a normal little 3-year-old almost. He'll be 3 in March. And he's just a complete miracle. He's completely overcome the grave. He's completely overcome having any sort of genetic defect. He's completely overcome having any sort of... Uh-oh. Maybe it thinks I'm not talking anymore. My batteries might be dead. That was weird. So he actually does still have enlarged ventricles, but there is no clinical relevance for having large ventricles. So we learned this because we moved back to Pittsburgh to have a more neurosurgery follow-up, and one of the surgeons on the team actually has large ventricles. And one of the other doctors referred to him as one of the smartest people he's ever met. Yeah, I think these batteries are going. Do we have another one? I can keep trying to talk, but I'm sure it'll still die. We're gonna look for batteries here. But so he has these enlarged ventricles, but he doesn't have hydrocephalus, which is the clinical term given to him from the brain bleed and the brain swelling. So hydrocephalus was actually removed from his medical record at 1 year old, which was the biggest concern aside from any genetic abnormality he could have. So he actually doesn't have it anymore, because having hydrocephalus would mean that your head would have had to have swelled and your brain tissue would have had to have been negatively impacted and would have required intervention. So he's just overcome everything, and really just amazing. He came home on oxygen for a little while, and we went through 1 year of speech therapy and occupational therapy to make sure that he was up to speed on his speech. The only thing that he really suffered from, like many premature babies, are sensitivity to textures. So they're very sensitive to touch, their skin is sensitive, their mouth is sensitive, and it affects their eating habits. So we went through a year of occupational therapy. That's the only thing that has come out of all of this this crisis, this disaster that we went through. And so we just wanted to share that miracle with you because we believe in God's full healing, and fully turning around a situation that seemed like it had no way out, that it couldn't become better, so that it is possible, the miracles still happen, that he is a live little miracle. And not only that, but he is the happiest little kid you will ever meet. He goes and literally, he will spiritually and physically touch every person he sees. We go to the store and he's the little kid going to every person saying hi. He's the little kid going and smiling and bringing joy to everybody. He's the little kid that I've never seen a kid love the happy birthday song so much, but he loves celebrating birthdays, and I can't explain it. We'll be out at dinner, and he wants to sing happy birthday with everybody else that's coming to sing another table happy birthday. We're at home watching Elmo, and he wants to watch the Happy Birthday Elmo movie over and over again. I mean, he just really wants to celebrate life, and the only way that I can think that it makes sense is because he was given a chance at life. So he already knows that, he knows that he was given this opportunity because he has a calling on his life. And we all have callings on our lives. And he just had a more difficult start where the devil kept trying to take him, kept trying to take his life, kept trying to take him from being developed in me, kept trying to take him once he was out of me. And he, still, today has gotten stronger from that. So his life has a very strong calling on it. And I'm so glad that I followed these 4 points that I want to share with you today that got me through my crisis. Amen. So the first thing that I did that got me through everything that we experienced was specific, persistent, and proactive prayer. So we always talk about how important prayer is, and it's important because that's what our main communication to God is, to making our relationship with God. But, prayer goes more than just, oh God, I have this situation here, just fix it, just fix it, just fix it, just fix it. There was a lot of that coming out of me because I was very overwhelmed and caught off guard by what was happening to us. All I could think at the beginning was, why is this happening to me? Like, I am a healthy person. I don't drink. I don't do drugs. I want this child. And, there's lots of people every day that get pregnant and don't want their children. And why is it happening to me for a child that I want? And I'm a good mom, but it wasn't happening to me because of that. He is going to have a much stronger life coming out of all of this because he's gotten so much strength from overcoming the situation, from defying all the odds. And now he can stand on that as he grows, knowing that God was there for him, that God survived, pulled him out of that situation and survived him through it, survived us through it as a family. So when I talk about specific, persistent, and proactive prayer, that means that when I first heard that something was wrong, hello? When I first heard that something was wrong in my 20-week anatomy exam, I was already praying to turn it around. So they're saying, your child probably has Down syndrome or likely has Down syndrome. And I'm there praying, God, he doesn't have Down syndrome. He's perfect and whole in every way. That he is perfect and whole in his whole genetic structure, that there is no abnormality. So I'm there turning around every negative report from the start. And I was very persistent about my prayers because I had to continue praying that God was going to bring the breakthrough. I couldn't stop because there's no one that could fix the situation. So I said on my last Instagram video for this message that there's no luck, there's no karma, there's no chance in the world that everything could have turned out the way it was. The only way that everything was turned around was because of God. And one big part of that was because we prayed so consistently, and we had people around the world praying for our situation. So I went out and beyond our little bubble, and I submitted our prayer request to lots of other ministries, and I wanted other people to pray. And some people don't know if that works, or they might feel like that's a sort of like an invasion of privacy because you don't want other people to know what's going on with you and you don't know them. But I'll tell you, like, one ministry I reached out to was Fresh Fire Ministries. It's a Todd Bentley ministry in South Carolina, and we go see him often when he visits in Florida. And he does a lot of messages online. He does a lot of live streaming. And we had him pray for us probably 5 times. And the last time that I heard him speak, he actually was online live, and I was falling asleep, and I fell asleep, and he was talking for hours. The only moment I was awoken was the moment that he was praying for Joshua. So he had pulled out our prayer. I was just miraculously awakened to hear him pray for our son. And that's when I knew that people were really they were really also being persistent with their prayers. That they knew how important it was to join with you in prayer and to have a team. And so how much that is when God talks about you having a petition. You know, when you think of a petition, it isn't just you. You know, a petition is more than you. When you think of a petition, like even in a political sense, you have a whole thing, a whole letter of lines that people need to sign because they need to agree with you. So when I think of petitioning, I needed to go out and get those people to agree with me for my need and to petition on my side, because it was such a severe situation that there were some times that I couldn't even seem to pray. I was so overcome with what was happening. And it's probably those people that stood in my place praying for our situation that got us through. Amen. So the second one was discerning the correct decisions to make. So when I talk about discerning the correct decisions, it's because we have free will. We have a free will to decide whether we want to do something or not. And when you have a relationship with God and you can feel what kind of decision you should be making, I needed to go with a decision that I knew was right because it was God's decision and not because it was a decision I wanted to make. I knew that making correct, discerning decisions was going to also be important in saving his life. So my example of that is I could have not allowed him to have been transferred to Miami. Since that was 3 hours away from us, that made us traveling parents. I was only going to be able to see him once a week. And I could have said, no, I want him to stay here where I have easy access, you know, and not allow him to go. But by allowing him to go, even though I didn't have access to him, and even though he didn't need neurosurgery intervention, the only surgery he did need was a heart surgery. And that was significant because of the week of his heart surgery. The heart surgery program at St. Mary's where he was delivered was shut down because it didn't have a sufficient team to do heart surgeries, and they had an overwhelming number of deaths from neonatal and infant children going through their heart surgery program than the national average. So it's very possible that had I had him stay at St. Mary's, that could have been another attempt on his life. And I thought that was significant that week he got the surgery, that's when it was shut down for St. Mary's. So it was making the correct decisions through discernment. Just like how we decided to leave for Florida the week I found out I was pregnant, because it would make sense in the natural for you as a person to not want to leave your family in such a severe occurrence in your life. You know, that's life-changing. Have a baby is life-changing. Not many people would move away from their family when you're having a life event. But I knew for us it was important in whatever was going to happen. And it's not that I felt anything bad was going to happen. I just felt that it was necessary in our future. So I made a decision that was a God decision and not a free will decision. So the third point is being obedient to God's direction. So sometimes you can be discerning and you can hear the decision but not make the decision, again, because of your free will. So I had to be obedient to his direction. What was important about the job that I left and took here in Florida was that that job actually warred on my side for the insurance, the health insurance that I had. So imagine the kind of bills that we were seeing from this circumstance and the kinds of things that weren't being covered by our insurance that they said we were going to have to cover. So this new job that I took had an excellent benefits section. It was one woman, and she warred for me on my behalf with the insurance company. This was very important because when he was transferred to Miami for those 140 days, the doctor that took care of him, the neurosurgeon, charged $5,136 a day to take care of him. A day. Now that's just his care. That's not the ultrasounds. That's not all the procedures. That's not the blood work. That's not the virologist. That's not the pulmonologist. That's not the cardiologist. Okay, that's one doctor on a team of people. And this doctor was not covered by my insurance. He was not a part of my in-network provider. He was not a part of what my insurance was going to cover. We had $1 million in debt that we were liable to pay because this insurance, they've already paid so much. Like, think of all the things that they have covered for the procedures, the other doctors, his hospital stay for so long in both hospitals. It's one more thing that they'd have to pick up. And not only would they have to pick it up, but their negotiation for the price of that doctor wasn't going to be the same because he wasn't in network, so they might have to pay the full deal, the full 9 yards. And my new job went before me and took care of it. They got the insurance company to accept that they should pay that doctor his $1 million because he was the only neonatal neurosurgeon in all of Florida and likely the surrounding states to take on his delicate case. So we had $1 million debt and it disappeared. And not only did it disappear, but they got the insurance company to not even send me any more bills because it's just amazing. I didn't have to deal with any more medical bills because it's, after a certain point, when it's covered by your insurance, you're not liable to pay anything that's in network. But they didn't even want me to see the stress of the bills because it's a lot of mail. And I was getting so overwhelmed with all of the mail and mostly from the things that weren't covered. And I didn't even want to see the other things that were covered. It was just too much information. So she just took it on, warred on my behalf, got that problem solved. And let me just tell you that financially, God really came through. Not only did he eliminate that, but he provided our finances through GoFundMe so that we could afford to be traveling parents and go see him every weekend. So some people think it's so matter of fact that when you go see your child in the hospital, you can go stay at Ronald McDonald. You can go stay in the hospital provided, rooms. And it is not true, especially for a hospital like Nicholas Children's, because they accept children from outside of the country, from the islands beneath them, from Mexico. They get the children coming into the United States when they're the closest hospital. So even though we were traveling parents, we weren't the first people in line because there were people from other countries. There were people from other states. So we got a room one time provided to us by the hospital for all 6 months. So every weekend we had to pay for our gas, we had to pay for our car, we had to pay for the hospital, for the food, just the transportation, the hotel, we had to pay. And so every weekend it was a couple $100, and that just really adds up. That wasn't in the budget when you're also having all these other things you're responsible of paying. So through GoFundMe, we got all these people that we didn't even know to help support us to travel. And let me tell you that most of the people that supported us weren't even Christians. And I think that that's so significant because we talk about how giving you need to be as a Christian and how sometimes Christians aren't even the ones to answer the call to give the blessing. You have to be able to hear the call, to provide the blessing for you to receive the blessing.
Amen.
So when you're praying to God, I need this money because I got to do this. I need this money because I got to go see my son. I need you to provide. I need you to give me the financial assistance. And he sends a whole bunch of Hindus to my page. And they just blessed us. They just blessed us with money. They just provided. They gave the blessing. They mostly gave our financial blessing for us to see our son. So they answered the call. They gave the blessing. And that's part of you receiving your blessing, if you're watching online, is that you have to receive, that you are led to help somebody. You're often blessed and given your blessing because of somebody else, because somebody else answered the call. So number 4, ending this, is being thankful. And this is very important because being thankful is stepping back and recognizing and acknowledging, giving gratitude that what has happened is out of your control, it's out of anybody else's solution, and the only person that could bring the breakthrough is God. And it's only because that we believe that Jesus died for our sins, rose again, that he heals the sick, that he raises the dead, that he is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, that he came in and pulled us out of our circumstance and made all wrongs right. Made everything that had happened correct. It all came into alignment. And so being thankful is very important. It's said in the Bible in 1 Thessalonians 5:18, it says, be thankful in everything, in all circumstances. And I realized after waking up at night, I woke up at night a couple of days ago, and I just had this download of this message to give with our testimony, that what I was actually walking out in my crisis was Philippians 4:6. And it says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer, petition, and thanksgiving, present your requests to God.
Amen.
So living the opposite of ending this with being thankful would be me dwelling on what had happened and being bitter because I didn't get to have a full-term pregnancy. I didn't get to have a joyful pregnancy. I didn't get to feel how other women felt about being the most beautiful they've ever been when they're pregnant. I didn't get to take my baby home after delivering him in the hospital. That I had to suffer all this time contending for my son's life. For me, that is not being thankful. That's living in bitterness and looking at my circumstance from that perspective. And while those things happened, while I didn't hold a full-term baby, I had a child that's perfect.
Amen.
And I still get to be a family with my husband. I still get to raise my son. And now we have an even greater calling on our life because we have an even stronger appreciation for the fact that every life, every child has a destiny, and you can't miss your destiny. And how many destinies are missed because of women that believe the things the medical field says and decides to abort their baby because that's what the medical field tells them is best. So, wrapping up my message, I just wanted to share those 4 points with you, that's what got us through our crisis. This is how we turned it around. These are 4 points that you can use to get through any crisis that might happen to you. So I just want to repeat them again. The first one is specific, persistent, and proactive prayer, especially through prayer partnerships. That's your petition. 2 is discerning the correct decisions to make. 3 is being obedient from God's direction to make those decisions. And 4 is being thankful and stepping outside and knowing that He has the plan, that He brought the solution, and that He brought the breakthrough.
Amen.
So thank you for being with us today. I'm just going to pray us out. We're going to collect our tithes and offerings. So thank you for being here today. I pray that my testimony and sharing our story has really touched your heart, that you can use it and what I told you to help guide you through any crisis that you may have. Anyone that's watching on my live stream, you can send me a DM if you have anything that you want me to pray about. I will be your prayer partner, and we will collect our tithes and offerings at this time.